Picture this, a world where thunder isn't just atmospheric pressure and lightning, but the mighty Thor riding across the sky in his goat-drawn chariot. A world where that winter draft sneaking under your door might actually be frost giants breathing down your neck. Welcome to the realm of Norse mythology, where the fantastical wasn't just bedtime stories, but the actual belief system of the tough-as-nails Vikings who conquered half of Europe while wearing horned helmets. Well, actually, they didn't wear horned helmets. That's just Hollywood's version. Kind of like thinking all New Yorkers eat pizza while hanging off skyscrapers. The Norse cosmos wasn't just your standard heaven and earth setup. It was an intricate multi-level universe connected by Yggdrasil, the world tree, basically the universe's most impressive houseplant. This cosmic ash tree supported 9 distinct worlds, each home to different beings and creatures that could make your most vivid nightmare seem like a pleasant daydream. From the icy realm of Niflheim to the fiery Muspelheim, from the god home of Asgard to the human world of Midgard. This wasn't just geography, it was a whole cosmic apartment complex with some truly problematic neighbors. And speaking of neighbors, the creatures inhabiting these realms weren't your typical fantasy lineup. While elves and dwarves might sound familiar to anyone who's picked up a fantasy novel or played a role-playing game, Norse mythology's versions came first and packed quite a different punch. These weren't Tolkien's elegant immortals or Disney's singing mining crew. These were complex, often dangerous beings with their own societies, magic, and very specific grudges. What makes Norse creatures particularly fascinating is how they blur the line between monster and person. Unlike the clear-cut good versus evil of many mythologies, Norse creatures operated in shades of gray. Giants weren't just mindless monsters, but ancient beings with their own culture who sometimes even married gods. Dwarves could create the most magical treasures in existence or curse heroes for centuries. Even the gods themselves weren't purely good. They were cunning, flawed, and sometimes downright petty. In the Norse world, it wasn't about white knights and evil dragons. It was about power, cunning, and survival. Ready to meet the creatures that kept even the fearless Vikings up at night? Buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into a world where the monsters don't hide under your bed. They might invite you for dinner, and you might be the main course. Before there were gods, before there were humans, before there were even lands to walk on, there were giants. The Mjölnir weren't just big humans with anger management issues. They were the primordial forces of chaos and nature itself. Think of them as the universe's first draft, powerful, untamed, and about as subtle as a volcanic eruption at a meditation retreat. It all started with Ymir, the first being in existence, a frost giant so massive that when the gods eventually killed him, family reunions were intense back then. His body became the world itself. His flesh formed the earth, his blood the seas, his bones the mountains, and his skull the heavens. Talk about giving your body to science. Ymir himself was born from the meeting of fire and ice in the great void of Ginnungagap. Basically the ultimate opposites attract scenario, except instead of a cute rom-com, it produced a race of world-threatening giants. But here's where it gets complicated. Despite being the eternal enemies of the gods, giants weren't just mindless monsters. They were incredibly intelligent, masters of magic, and possessed wisdom that sometimes surpassed the gods themselves. Odin, the All-Father, would regularly journey into Jotunheim, giant home, seeking knowledge. He even sacrificed his eye to drink from the well of wisdom guarded by the giant Mimir. That's right, the king of gods thought giant wisdom was worth giving up 50% of his vision. That's commitment to education that would make any college student with student loans feel seen. And then there's the awkward fact that the gods and giants couldn't seem to stop intermarrying. Thor's mother was a giant. Loki was half giant. Even Odin had giant ancestors. It's like finding out your family has been feuding with the neighbors for generations, but half your cousins secretly married their children. Giants like Skadi, who became a goddess after marrying the god Njord, showed just how blurry the lines could be. Their marriage didn't last, though. She preferred the mountains, he preferred the seashore. The original geographical incompatibility divorce. Giants came in all varieties. Frost giants with icy powers, fire giants that could melt steel with a glance, mountain giants that could be mistaken for landscapes until they suddenly stood up. Some were beautiful enough to tempt gods, others so hideous they could turn milk sour just by looking at it. The giantess Angerboda and Loki produced three of the most terrifying creatures in Norse mythology. Hel, who rules the underworld, Jörmungandr, the world serpent, and Fenrir, the monstrous wolf destined to kill Odin himself during Ragnarok. Talk about problematic offspring. And you thought teaching your kids to clean their rooms was hard. What made giants truly terrifying wasn't just their size or strength. It was their role in the cosmic order. According to prophecy, the giants would eventually battle the gods in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, resulting in the death of most major deities and the destruction of the world. Imagine knowing your annoying neighbors are actually destined to burn down your house someday. Makes those loud parties seem a bit more menacing, doesn't it? If giants were the raw, untamed forces of nature, dwarves were nature refined and reshaped through skill and cunning. Forget the cheerful whistling miners from Snow White. Norse dwarves were subterranean master craftsmen with questionable ethics and a serious attitude problem. Think of them as fantasy's original tech bros, brilliant innovators who could create miraculous objects, but might also ruin your life if you gave them a bad review. According to some versions of the myths, dwarves were born from the maggots that fed on the dead flesh of Ymir, the primordial giant. Yes, you heard that right. From maggots to master craftsmen. If that's not the ultimate rags to riches story, what is? The gods decided these small, pale beings deserved sentience and gave them intelligence in humanoid form, though they remained bound to the earth and stone from which they emerged. They established their kingdom in Nidavellir, or Svartalfheim in some accounts, a vast network of underground forges, mines, and halls that would make modern-day billionaires' bunkers look like studio apartments. What made dwarves as special wasn't their charming personality. Most were grumpy, greedy, and grudge-holding to an Olympic level. No, what made them indispensable was their unmatched craftsmanship. The most powerful artifacts in Norse mythology came from dwarven forges. Thor's hammer, Mjölnir, dwarf-made, Odin's spear, Gungnir, that never misses its target, dwarf work, Freya's necklace, Brisingamen. You guessed it, dwarven craftsmanship. They were basically the Apple Inc. of the Norse universe, except instead of planned obsolescence, their products were so perfect they could literally kill giants and were guaranteed to last until the end of the world. The tale of how Thor got his hammer perfectly captures the dwarves' dual nature as both invaluable allies and dangerous enemies. It started with Loki cutting off the golden hair of Thor's wife Sif as a prank. Loki invented trolling millennia before the internet. To avoid Thor turning him into a lightning-struck pancake, Loki promised to replace it with even better hair. He visited the sons of Ivaldi, master dwarven craftsmen who created not only magical golden hair for Sif that grew like real hair, but also Skidbladnir, a ship that could fold down to pocket size, the original Transformer, and Gungnir, Odin's infallible spear. But Loki, being Loki, couldn't leave well enough alone. He bet another pair of dwarf brothers, Brokkr and Sindri, that they couldn't make three equally magnificent treasures. The stakes? Loki's head. While they worked, Loki transformed into a fly and bit Brokkr 3 times to disrupt the forging process. Despite these sabotage attempts, the brothers created Gullinbursti, a golden boar that could run through air and water, Draupnir, a ring that duplicated itself every 9th night, the ultimate passive income, and Mjölnir, Thor's mighty hammer. Though slightly flawed with a short handle due to Loki's interference, Mjölnir was declared the winner. When it came time to collect Loki's head, the trickster god used a loophole. He had bet his head, but not his neck. The dwarves, unable to take his head without the neck, settled for sewing Loki's lips shut instead. The original binding arbitration, if you will. This shows another crucial aspect of dwarves. They were sticklers for the exact wording of agreements and had an almost supernatural ability to find loopholes themselves when it suited them. Despite their small stature, dwarves were mighty opponents. They shunned sunlight, which was said to turn them to stone, possibly the origin of trolls in later folklore. Some dwarves were renowned for wisdom that rivaled the giants. Alvis, all-wise, Skirnir was so knowledgeable that Thor had to trick him to prevent him from marrying his daughter, keeping him talking until sunrise turned him to stone. That's one way to handle unwanted suitors, though modern dating apps might be slightly more humane. If dwarves were the engineers of the Norse universe, elves were its supermodels with supernatural powers. Beautiful, mysterious, and potentially dangerous if you caught them on a bad day. Unlike modern fantasy elves who spend their time shooting arrows and looking ethereal in forests, Norse elves occupied a strange space between gods and humans, less powerful than the former, but far more magical than the latter. Think of them as the Instagram influencers of the mythological world. Gorgeous, somewhat divine, and you're never quite sure what they actually do. The Norse divided elves into two main categories, the Ljósalfar, light elves, and the Dökkalfar, dark elves. The light elves lived in Alfheimr, a realm so radiant that it was said its inhabitants glowed more beautifully than the sun itself. These beings were associated with fertility, beauty, and nature. Basically what would happen if you combined supermodels with garden fairies and gave them godlike status. They were so beautiful that some scholars believe they were minor deities related to the fertility god Freyr, who actually ruled over Alfheimr. Imagine having beings so gorgeous that they needed their own separate realm just so ordinary creatures wouldn't be constantly distracted by their divine glow-up. The dark elves, meanwhile, lived below ground and looked blacker than pitch. Some scholars argue they might actually be the same as dwarves, while others insist they were a separate race altogether. The sagas aren't exactly clear on this point. Medieval Scandinavian writers apparently didn't think to include a glossary of mythical beings for future readers. What we do know is that dark elves shunned the light, preferred subterranean living, and were generally considered more troublesome than their shiny cousins upstairs. Basically, they were the original Goths, hanging out underground, dressed in black, and judging everyone else's life choices. What made elves particularly interesting wasn't just their beauty or categorization issues, it was their unique relationship with humans. The Norse believed elves could influence human fortunes dramatically. They could bestow blessings of health, fertility, and good luck. Or they could inflict illness, crop failure, and general misfortune if offended. Early Scandinavians were so concerned about staying on the elves' good side that they held regular feasts called alfablot, elf sacrifices, that were so sacred and private that even other humans weren't allowed to witness them. Imagine throwing a party so exclusive that you can't even tell your best friends what happened. That's how seriously they took elf relations. These mysterious beings were believed to live in hills, mountains, and forests, places that marked the boundary between the civilized world and the wild. They could be particularly dangerous when encountered at crossroads or during twilight, those liminal spaces in times when the boundaries between worlds thin. The Norse understood something modern horror movies still capitalize on. Nothing good happens at crossroads after dark. Elves were also intimately connected with the dead. Some scholars suggest that they may have originated as ancestral spirits or lesser deities associated with death in burial mounds. In fact, the Old Norse word for nightmare, mare, was related to these supernatural beings. The mare, female elf or similar entity, would sit on a sleeper's chest at night, causing terrible dreams and a sensation of suffocation. Sleep paralysis explained through elfin harassment, somehow more poetic than modern medical explanations, even if less scientifically accurate. Despite their sometimes troublesome nature, elves were also sources of wisdom and magic. In several sagas, heroes seek out elves for magical knowledge or healing. Elf women were particularly renowned for their healing arts and sometimes formed romantic attachments with human men, though these relationships rarely ended well. Cross-species dating in the Norse world was complicated at best, catastrophic at worst, yet people kept trying. Some things never change. Imagine being in the middle of a bloody battle, sword in hand, enemies all around, and suddenly you spot gorgeous warrior women riding through the sky on magnificent steeds, their armor gleaming in the sun. Good news, you've caught the attention of the Valkyries. Bad news, that probably means you're about to die. The Valkyries were Odin's special forces, divine maidens who swept over battlefields, selecting which warriors would die and which would live. They were basically the original talent scouts, except instead of offering record deals, they offered an all-expenses-paid trip to Valhalla. The word Valkyrie literally means chooser of the slain, a job description that's simultaneously terrifying and impressive. These weren't your damsel in distress mythological females. They were powerful warrior women who served as Odin's personal death squad and HR department rolled into one. Their primary task was to select the bravest warriors who died in battle, the Einherjar, and escort them to Valhalla, Odin's magnificent hall in Asgard. There, these chosen warriors would prepare for Ragnarok by fighting all day and feasting all night, the Viking equivalent of heaven, which tells you a lot about Viking priorities. In the mead halls of Valhalla, Valkyries served double duty as waitresses, making sure the Einherjar never wanted for drink or food. Picture the toughest bar staff you've ever seen, women who could both serve you beer and potentially end your existence with a spear thrust. The Norse didn't mess around with traditional gender roles when it came to their supernatural beings. These divine women were both nurturers and dealers of death, both beautiful maidens and fearsome warriors. Complexity that would make even modern character writers envious. The Valkyries rode through the skies on their mighty steeds, and the northern lights were said to be the reflection of their armor as they soared overhead. Perhaps the most spectacular job perk in all of mythology. Some tales say they could transform into swans or ravens when not on official duty. They weren't just professional death choosers, they were shapeshifters too, adding yet another layer to their already impressive resume. The most famous Valkyrie is undoubtedly Brynhildr, whose tragic tale forms a central part of the Volsunga saga. Brynhildr defied Odin by choosing the wrong warrior to die in battle, and her punishment was severe. She was stripped of her divinity and placed in an enchanted sleep, surrounded by a wall of fire. Only the bravest hero could awaken her. When Sigurd, also called Siegfried in Germanic versions, managed this feat, they fell in love and exchanged vows. But through a magical deception, Sigurd forgot Brynhildr and married another woman. The enraged former Valkyrie then orchestrated Sigurd's death before killing herself to join him in the afterlife. It's basically Romeo and Juliet, with more swords, magic, and divine intervention, the ultimate mythological power couple gone wrong. Valkyries weren't just mythological figures. They influenced actual Norse society. The idea of fierce female warriors may have inspired the shield maidens, women who fought alongside men, according to some historical accounts. Archaeologists have discovered female Viking warrior graves complete with weapons and battle injuries, suggesting that women warriors weren't just confined to myth. The line between Valkyrie and human shield maiden was blurry enough that some particularly fierce female warriors might have been viewed as almost supernatural in their own time, the original girl power icons, thousands of years before the Spice Girls. As with many Norse beings, Valkyries straddled the line between helpful and harmful. While they offered glory and eternal reward to chosen warriors, they were also harbingers of death who could manipulate battle outcomes. Some tales depict them weaving the fates of men on gruesome looms made of human entrails and weighted with severed heads, a crafting project that would make even the most hardcore Etsy seller faint. They weren't just collectors of the brave, they were weavers of destiny itself. Long before Daenerys Targaryen was calling herself Mother of Dragons, or Tolkien's Smaug was hoarding gold, Norse mythology had its own collection of scaled terrors slithering through the nine worlds. But these weren't your standard fire-breathing treasure guardians. Norse dragons and serpents were cosmic threats, world-encircling monsters, and living omens of the end times. They came in various sizes, from enormous world-eating serpents down to venomous assassins that could fit in a tiny box. The Norse dragon portfolio was diverse, but they all shared one quality. You definitely didn't want to meet one on your morning commute. The undisputed heavyweight champion of Norse serpents was Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent. This child of Loki and the giantess Angrboda grew so large that he encircled the entire world, gripping his own tail in his mouth. Talk about an overachiever. Most snakes are content with catching a mouse, but Jörmungandr had to go and wrap himself around the whole planet. He resided in the depths of the ocean, making ancient Norse sailors think twice about what might be lurking beneath their longships. The serpent was so massive that when he moved, tsunamis crashed against shores worldwide. His arch-enemy was Thor, and their hatred for each other made modern sports rivalries look like playground squabbles. Their most famous encounter came during a fishing trip that went slightly awry. Thor, disguised as a young man, convinced the giant Ymir to take him fishing. While Ymir was content catching ordinary whales, as one does, Thor rowed out to the deepest part of the ocean and baited his hook with an ox head. Because when you're fishing for the world's largest serpent, you need appropriately sized bait. When Jörmungandr bit, Thor pulled so hard that his feet broke through the bottom of the boat as he braced himself. Just as he was about to strike the serpent with his hammer, the terrified Ymir cut the line, allowing Jörmungandr to escape back into the depths. It was the mythological equivalent of the one that got away fishing story, except the fish was planet-sized and could trigger Ragnarok. According to prophecy, Thor and Jörmungandr are destined to kill each other during Ragnarok. Thor will finally slay his serpentine nemesis, but will only be able to take 9 steps afterward before succumbing to the serpent's venom. Even in death, this monster gets the last laugh, or hiss as the case may be. Not all Norse dragons were ocean dwellers. Nidhugr, meaning malice striker, was a terrifying dragon that gnawed constantly at the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. This wasn't just garden variety tree damage. By attacking Yggdrasil, Nidhugr was essentially trying to undermine the entire cosmic structure. He was also said to feed on the corpses of murderers, oath-breakers, and adulterers in Nostrun, a shore in the realm of hell. Imagine a dragon that both threatens world stability and serves as a corpse disposal system. Efficiency that modern waste management companies could only dream of. Fafnir represents yet another type of Norse dragon, one created through greed and transformation. Originally a dwarf, or a giant son, depending on the version, Fafnir murdered his father for a cursed gold hoard, including the magical ring and Varanaut. After securing this treasure, he transformed into a dragon to better guard it. The ultimate example of taking work-from-home security measures too far. The hero Sigurd eventually slew Fafnir by digging a pit in the path the dragon took to drink water and stabbing upward into his soft underbelly. An early example of strategic thinking over brute force that would make any military tactician proud. Before dying, Fafnir warned Sigurd that the treasure was cursed and would bring death to anyone who possessed it. Sigurd, displaying the classic hero trait of selective hearing, took the treasure anyway. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for him. In fact, this particular story thread, Cursed Treasure, Dragon-Slaying Tragic Hero, influenced everything from Wagner's Ring Cycle to Tolkien's The Hobbit. Norse dragons were setting literary trends, millennia before becoming fantasy novel staples. Not all serpents in Norse mythology were enormous world destroyers. The tale of Baldur's death features a much smaller but equally deadly snake. When the beloved god Baldur began having dreams of his death, his mother Frigg extracted oaths from everything in creation not to harm her son. Everything except the seemingly insignificant mistletoe. The trickster Loki, discovering this oversight, crafted a dart from mistletoe and tricked the blind god Hooter into throwing it at Baldur during a game where gods were throwing objects at the supposedly invulnerable god. Some versions say this dart was guided by, or even transformed into a serpent, bringing death to the one god everyone loved. This proves that in Norse mythology, even the smallest serpent could be the deadliest. A lesson in never underestimating your enemies, especially the slithery ones. Fenrir was, like so many problematic figures in Norse tales, another child of Loki and the giantess Angrboda. While most parents worry about their children going through rebellious phases or getting bad grades, Loki's parenting produced a world-encircling serpent, the goddess of death, and a wolf destined to devour the king of gods. Talk about family problems that make modern dysfunctional families look positively harmonious. The word troll comes from the Old Norse troll, which means giant or demon, though trolls were distinct from the Jotnar giants in many accounts. While divisions between different mythological beings were often blurry in Norse folklore, trolls generally occupied a lower rung on the cosmic ladder than giants. They weren't primordial forces shaping the universe. They were more like particularly troublesome forces of nature, making life difficult for humans on a local scale, like a personification of the avalanche that destroys your village or the mountain that makes travel nearly impossible. If you thought zombies were a modern horror invention, the Vikings would like a word with you, preferably from a safe distance. Long before The Walking Dead made shuffling corpses a primetime entertainment staple, Norse mythology featured its own terrifying undead, the Draugr. These weren't your garden variety zombies looking for brains. They were vengeful, intelligent, supernaturally strong revenants with magical powers and serious attitude problems. Think of them as Zombie 2.0, all the horror of decomposition with none of the mental drawbacks and several magical upgrades. Among the most beloved of these beings were the Nissa, also called tomta in Sweden. These were domestic spirits resembling small elderly men with beards, often wearing pointed red caps. Yes, they're basically the original garden gnomes, except with actual supernatural powers rather than just decorative value. Standing no taller than a child, Nisi attached themselves to specific farms or households, helping with chores and protecting the family and livestock, provided they were treated with respect. The key to keeping your household Nissa happy? A bowl of porridge with butter on Christmas Eve? Forget to leave this offering and your helpful house spirit might transform into a mischievous poltergeist, hiding tools, tangling animals' tails, or causing milk to sour. These beings represent a perfect example of Norse pragmatism. Even supernatural relationships were based on fair exchange and mutual respect rather than blind worship or fear.